The appearance of Dory and Broggy seems to me more for another reason than their sole intention or coincidence. I think it was rather Shanks' plan for them to go to Egghead Island for Luffy, and most likely, it was Shanks himself who went for them to notify them of Nika's return. In fact, I think it's part of the plan that Shanks has been planning for years and is just starting to be put into motion since the awakening of the Nika fruit. So this gets into the mastermind Shanks theory. The idea that for better or worse, Shanks is subtly influencing the events of the world in a big way. But something that I'm still really curious about is what Shanks said in chapter 1076. I think I spent a bit too much time talking, but you can't blame us for wanting to catch up when old friends who thought each other dead are reunited. And I guess we don't confirm exactly who the old friends in question are, but it's heavily implied to be Dory and Broggy. So Shanks thought that they were dead and they thought that Shanks was dead. Maybe. And if this is the case, then I highly doubt that they were part of his master plan, because there's no doubt in my mind that they went on to swap stories about Luffy, and Shanks definitely knows more than he's ever let on. He understood from the very beginning how important Luffy's devil fruit was to the world, hence why he made a one-arm investment in Luffy's future. I think this might be another classic case of One Piece fate. Shanks was checking in on Elbaf and just happened to run into Dory and Broggy. They swapped Sun God stories, and a bird delivered a newspaper detailing the siege of Egghead, and Dory and Broggy went, oh, right, I guess we should go and help our dude. But if it was a coincidence, then that just raises the question of what Shanks was doing on Elbaf to begin with, whether it was just a quick stop for old time's sake, or if there was a greater reasoning. For example, Shanks has said that he's now planning to go after the One Piece, so maybe he was using Elbaf as a rally point for his Grand Fleet, to consolidate all of his forces in preparation to finally make the big move he's been planning. I just realized, this continues the trend of bringing back old characters for the ending, right? Like Crocodile on Cross-Guild, Vivian Warpole in the Reverie, and now Dory and Broggy. So this comment has made me realize that recent One Piece has been very nostalgia heavy, but like for the Alabasta saga in particular, because now we do have returning to major plot relevance Princess Nefertari Vivi, Dory and Broggy from Little Garden, Warpole from Drum Island, and of course Crocodile from Alabasta. I mean, that last one's a bit of a stretch, because Crocodile has been pretty relevant again since Impel Down, but not at the major level he is now with his new bounty and affiliation with Cross-Guild. But it's almost like Oda is going through the story and collecting all of the characters we need for the final saga. And he's doing it in a very orderly chronological manner as well. And if we keep doing it in this order, then our next stop would be to collect some Skypiea characters, then some Water 7 characters, and so on and so forth until we have all of our toys ready for a big colossal war. So we're getting into some very, very serious deep-end One Piece now, where it's less about exploring and expanding, and now it's more about consolidating the characters and the stories that we already have. Katarina Devon will turn into Bonnie to take the pacifistas to Blackbeard, but real Bonnie will get to take Esper. So usually I'm not a huge fan of Devon theories, but this idea is actually kind of interesting. It makes me ask the question of how the pacifista recognize Bonnie. Is it just by voice pattern, or is there something deeper and more verifiable? Because if not, then any number of people could stroll in and take command of the army, and by any number I mean that number is probably more like 2, Katarina Devon and Bon Clay, maybe some others as well, like Charlotte Brule. She can make weird mirror clones of people, but I don't think they speak. However, it does present a very convenient opportunity for the Blackbeard pirates to continue gathering power. If Katarina Devon was aboard the ship off the coast of Egghead, and I think it's highly likely that she was, just via the process of elimination, then we could have a scene where the pacifista suddenly stop shooting and all head in a certain direction, only for us to see what looks like Jewelry Bonnie aboard a Blackbeard pirate's vessel, greedily stockpiling bear dads for nefarious future use. I think for something like that to work, we might need to make the real Bonnie fall unconscious somehow, which isn't particularly difficult to do. The last time it happened was because she saw a bug. Why didn't York tell the elders about this ploy Vegapunk had up his sleeve? This is a big hole in the plot. So this is something that I was slightly confused about as well. The first time I read the chapter, I blitzed through it. That's what I do. I'm a One Piece addict, and when I get that fix, there is no mercy. But that's why I go through and reread everything several times at a much more socially acceptable pace. So when I did the first read through, I didn't quite register that Atlas knew about Bonnie's command power as well. I thought it might have been one of those strategic Oda dialogue constructions where he deliberately omits important stated information for the sake of a dramatic payoff. And this is definitely something that's going to be worth double checking with the official translation, because the scans have been a little bit off lately, and not not doing particularly well with the subtleties of language, but from what I see, Atlas knew about Bonnie's position, which implies that the rest of the satellites would know as well, and one of the rest of the satellites is York. And if she knew, then that's the sort of thing she either would or should have communicated during her betrayal. Maybe it slipped her mind because most of the communication occurred before Bonnie arrived on the island, so it just didn't seem all that relevant. But when York was caught and speaking to the elders via snail phone, then that might have been the time to say something. The other explanation is that Stella may not have told the satellites about Bonnie's special program because he needed to keep it as secret as possible. And even though the satellites are literally him, the more hims there are and the more hims that know opens oneself up to compromise. And then after York was discovered and everything went into hell, that's when Stella revealed it to the others. My more pertinent question is, why didn't Stella reveal this earlier? Like say when Bonnie was about to be killed by Saint Saturn and Stella was just there chilling going, oh no, there's nothing we can possibly do about this evil act. If only I had some sort of backup plan that I'd implemented to get us out of a situation just like this one. Because you can definitely justify it to an extent. If Stella tells Bonnie about her power, then she becomes a big target for Saturn. So even once Saturn does take command of the Pacifista, that's not necessarily an instantaneous tell Bonnie situation. But when she's about to die anyway, then that probably is a tell Bonnie situation. So I do like that Bonnie is at the top of the hierarchy. I think it makes nice, solid, dramatic, good feeling sense. But I also think that the idea was implemented a bit clunkily, and it was done so it could be used for this dramatic situation. Speaking of York though, I have another question. Who's watching her right now? We haven't seen her since chapter 1092, which is when the Vegapunks cracked her code, moments before Kizaru rudely intruded and had to be thrown out by a giant Luffy. But since then, we've accounted for all of the Straw Hats and all of the satellites minus York. So what's she up to? There's a couple of other missing entities as well, notably Stussy and Kaku, but Stussy was taken out of action by Rob Lucci, and Kaku is trapped within a bubble. And this is really bad because leaving York unattended, it gives her the opportunity to escape and maybe head down and collect some Seraphim, which she can then command to do all sorts of assorted bad things. Are we 100% sure the Iron Giant is a robot? Could there be a chance it has somebody from the Void Century powering / living / installed inside of it? No, I'm not 100% sure at all. In fact, right now, I see both the Iron Giant and Kuma as very similar beings. Hollowed out shells with a little special something still lingering inside them, but with enough functional programming that each of them can still respond to certain commands or stimuli. So I suppose we have to assume that there's no biomatter within the Iron Giant, because surely Vegapunks would have performed a pretty extensive analysis on it, being Void Century technology and all, and Shaka did use the Iron Giant as the blueprint to build the Vegaforce 1, with the only thing he couldn't replicate being the power system. But the Iron Giant may very well be a Void Century Kuma, except instead of a Buccaneer, it was something else, like an Iron Giant that underwent the process for whatever reason. It's definitely not out of the question because Void Century technology is still so far beyond what even Vegapunks can create. And weirdly enough, it was Luffy who determined that this robot could move on its own, because he was looking for a place to slot himself in and pilot the mech. But then Luffy couldn't find a spot, and he used his brain to come to the conclusion that the robot must move on its own. That is very clever for Luffy, and we need to give him full credit for that, because it doesn't happen often. And something else that's really clever is the cover page of this chapter. I really like the idea of Robin dressing up a crocodile, but the idea I like a lot more is Robin dressing up the crocodile, which thankfully Takoyaki111 on Twitter brought to fruition, and it is a frankly glorious image. Kizaru getting his ass whooped is what I'm going to enthusiastically wait for the next 2 weeks. Alright, we have to ask this question. Is Kizaru even trying anymore? Kizaru in this chapter seemed about as useful as a squad of fodder marines. He gets ordered to kill someone, then he shoots a bunch of pew-pews, but they don't do any real damage, and then he just gets smacked out of the way by the main character. What he's doing right now is almost like weaponized incompetence. I mean, it might just be because Luffy is far too overwhelming at full food power, but this doesn't feel like the same relentless Kizaru that we've been seeing throughout One Piece to date. Maybe he is trying. Maybe I expect too much of him. I don't know, I just can't stop the feeling that Kizaru's heart isn't in this anymore. I just want to remind people, when Luffy was furious at Arlong and the tension was at its highest thus far, he stuck his feet in the ground, spun around, and got stuck and dizzy. So this comment is in response to a very vocal expression of general displeasement of how Luffy is currently handling himself. Laughing and goofing around whilst his friends are in very serious danger. There's an old man bleeding out on the floor and such. But I do think that people are very quick to forget how goofy Luffy has been all the way from chapter 1 until now, even in the most dire situations. This is not a new thing. But at the same time, to play Devil Fruit's advocate, in defense of everyone who aren't thrilled with Gear 5th and how wacky it's made all the fights, I do kind of get what they miss. Because in the past, when Luffy was up against a really tough opponent, you could see it on his face. He had this really powerful and inspirational determined glare to relentlessly punch his way out of any problem. And it was great for being able to empathize with Luffy, because Oda has this way of drawing him that almost makes his pain and struggle feel tangible as a reader. And Gear 5th thus far has more or less removed that aspect of his character, and I definitely think people are hyper aware of it due to the Gear 5th opponents we've had so far. Luffy has fought 3 people with this form: Kaido, Kizaru, and Rob Lucci. Lucci in particular draws a direct contrast because Luffy's original fight with Lucci was one of the toughest slugfests of his life, which I don't think was topped until Katakuri. But that's why I think using Rob Lucci on Egghead Island was a stroke of brilliance, because you have that direct contrast between Luffy then and Luffy now. Luffy fighting unawakened and trapped versus Luffy fighting fully liberated. But the main reason why this doesn't bother me is because of the messaging being hope. The message here isn't register the danger, pain, and suffering and then initiate a well thought out and execute a plan to stop it. No, it's none of that. The message is very simple: hope. And do you know what the most hopeless thing would be to see in any situation? Seeing the Joy Boy not expressing joy. Seeing the Joy Boy get angry or sad or serious. All of those things would be terrible. If the Joy Boy isn't smiling, then the world has no hope. It's doomed. So that's why I think it's important that no matter what the situation, the Sun God is always there, providing a ray of laughter, joy, and most importantly, a promise that everything is going to be okay. Do you think Harudin thought Usopp was Nika? He was the first to call him a god and raised him to the sky like a son. You know, that's not a terrible question. The Giants clearly seem to be much more well-educated about Nika than the rest of the world. So for fun, let's just examine the Dressrosa situation from Harudin's perspective. When Harudin first came across Usopp, he was a powerless slave, having been turned into a toy by Sugar. And what Harudin witnessed was Usopp going on to liberate all of the toy slaves in the stupidest and goofiest way imaginable. And if you know anything about Nika or Joy Boy, it's these 2 things. 1, he liberates people, and 2, he does weird stuff. All sorts of wacky body contorting and finding solutions to problems that defy conventional logic. And Usopp fulfilled all of that criteria immaculately, albeit accidentally. So no wonder it was Harudin to be the first to recognize Usopp's achievements, raise him aloft into what little sunlight there was in the underground facility, and then proclaim him as their savior, leading to the god Usopp epithet. Although I should say it's not clear if it was Harudin who labeled him. It would be very interesting if it was, because the dialogue says, "I knew it. You are sent from the heavens. You are our savior. Show us the light. What must we do, mighty god Usopp?" Which I think would be incredibly appropriate to come from Harudin, given what we now know now. Said too many nows there. But in the manga, the dialogue source is very vague. In the manga, it looks like the speech bubbles could be coming from anyone in the crowd, and that's what the anime decides to go with, because in that episode, the dialogue comes from some random dude in the crowd, not Harudin. Although who knows if that's actually the intended case or not. That might just be a decision that the anime made, not quite knowing Harudin's importance. But I should say, there is this really fun clip on YouTube with the God Usopp anime scene set to the score of The Lion King. Specifically the song when Simba ascends Pride Rock right at the end. And as hilarious as it is, it fits bizarrely well. But all in all, I do think it's possible that Harudin may have mistook Usopp for Nika, because he may have had a rough idea of when Nika was supposed to return, which is the year that Dressrosa took place, and all of Usopp's actions very much add up to the legend. Or if not Nika, Harudin saw sun god qualities within Usopp. I hope Brook plays music to the rhythm of the drums of liberation. Alright, that is the sort of thing I'm waiting for as well. I don't think it's just, a fun coincidence that the #1 crew acquisition target for Luffy has always been a musician, and Luffy's heartbeat. That's cool and all, but that's not really drums, plural. So with stuff like the Iron Giant reacting to Luffy's heartbeat and struggling to get up, it makes me wonder what would happen if Brook noticed this jaunty organ tune and decided to replicate it on a much louder scale. We could turn Brook into a full-on field musician, because music is a historically hugely important part of warfare that doesn't usually get explored in much depth, but it was very important for communication because battlefields, mate, they can get noisy, what with all of the yelling and the dying and everything. So you needed a clear rhythmic sound to pierce all of that to give signals and such. And maybe in that way, Brook could even function as something of a pilot for the Iron Giant, controlling its movements by altering the Song of Liberation. But it also gives me hope for a future when, wherever the final war is, all of Luffy's forces march and or sail into battle with musicians everywhere, all playing the drums of liberation, and doing it so loudly that the song can be heard all the way from the top of the Red Line at Marijois. But this could also explain why the Iron Giant woke up 200 years ago. When we first discovered that, it led to a lot of speculation that someone had awakened the Nika fruit, and it might not have been that at all. It could have been something much simpler, like somebody stumbling upon an ancient piece of sheet music and deciding to play it. Then it turns out it's the Song of Liberation and we accidentally woke up the robot. Kind of like what Uta did for the music demon in Film Red. Either way, I'm very keen to see where the beat takes us from here, and if you want to stay up to date, then don't forget to subscribe to this channel for consistent injections of One Piece culture administered directly into your YouTube feeds.